A single dinner can change a life. For Ricky Sterling, tonight was supposed to be the night he secured his legacy. He had the perfect deal on the table, a reservation at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, and what he believed was the perfect, adoring woman on his arm. He was about to land the multi-million-dollar investment that would save his company and catapult him into the stratosphere. But in his climb to the top, Ricky made one fatal, unforgivable mistake. He completely and utterly forgot who his wife truly was. He thought she was at a spa. He was about to find out she was the one who owned the entire mountain. Ricky Sterling checked his reflection in the tinted glass of the skyscraper, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. A Zegna suit, a Patek Philippe on his wrist, and the scent of expensive cologne. These were the armaments of a man on the verge of greatness. Or at least, that was the image he projected. The reality was far more precarious. His tech startup, Innovate AI, was hemorrhaging money. The brilliant algorithm that was meant to revolutionize logistics was proving too costly to scale, and his initial investors were getting nervous. He was weeks, maybe days, away from total collapse. Tonight was his lifeline. A Hail Mary pass in the form of a mysterious, ridiculously wealthy investor. "You look incredible, Rick," a sweet voice purred beside him. He turned, a practiced, charming smile spreading across his face. Claire Vance looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of adoration and ambition he found intoxicating. She was 26, a junior marketing associate at his company, with sharp features and a hunger to climb the corporate ladder that matched his own. She was also his mistress. "Not as incredible as you, Claire," he said, his hand finding the small of her back. She was wearing a crimson dress that was both elegant and audacious, a statement piece he had bought for her specifically for this occasion. "Tonight we're a power couple." Claire's smile widened. "So, tell me again about this investor. You've been so secretive." "Because they are secretive," Ricky explained, guiding her toward the valet. "It's a private equity firm, Reed Vanguard Holdings. They're old money, but they've been making aggressive tech plays. The person we're meeting is the final decision maker, the one who signs the checks. Goes by E.V. Reed. No first name, just initials. Old school, powerful. My sources say he's ruthless but fair. If he likes the pitch, we're golden. $10 million golden." Claire's eyes practically glittered. "And you're sure it's a he?" Ricky chuckled, a deep, condescending sound. "Trust me. In that world of finance, the ones with that kind of power, the ones who hide behind initials, they're always men. Probably some 70-year-old titan of industry named Edward or Eugene." He opened the door to his black Mercedes, the engine humming to life. As Claire slid in, he glanced at his phone. A single text from his wife, Evelyn, sent hours ago. "Have a productive week, honey. The spa is divine. Just what I needed. Love you." He typed a quick reply. "Miss you already. Relax and enjoy. You deserve it. Love you too." He felt a small, fleeting pang of guilt, which he quickly smothered with a wave of self-justification. Evelyn was a good woman, a wonderful wife. She was kind, stable, and came from a respectable family. But she was simple. She ran her late father's manufacturing business, a company that made high-grade industrial fasteners and components. It was a legacy business, boring, practical, and utterly devoid of the vision and dynamism that drove him. She didn't understand the pressure he was under, the thrill of innovation, the high-stakes game of venture capital. Her world was balance sheets and supply chains. His was the future. This spa retreat had been his idea. "You look tired, Ev," he had said a week ago, feigning concern. "You should take some time for yourself. Go to that place in Napa you love. Unplug." She had agreed, her smile grateful and unassuming. It was the perfect cover. With Evelyn blissfully getting massages and facials 100 miles away, he was free to wine and dine his new investor, with his exciting, dynamic new woman by his side. Bringing Claire wasn't just about desire, it was a strategic move. She represented the youthful, forward-thinking energy of his company. She was part of the brand. Evelyn, with her sensible shoes and talk of profit margins, would have been an anchor. "So," Claire said, snapping him out of his thoughts as they merged onto the freeway. "When he signs the deal, what's the first thing we do?" Ricky reached over and squeezed her thigh. "First, I secure the company. Then, I start making some changes in my life. Big changes. For us." It was a lie, mostly. He had no concrete plans to leave Evelyn. Divorce was messy and expensive. But it was the promise Claire needed to hear, the fuel that kept her loyal and eager. "I can't wait, Rick," she whispered, her voice breathy with excitement. As they pulled up to Aria, the city's most sought-after restaurant, Ricky felt a surge of adrenaline. The maitre d', a severe-looking man named Jean-Pierre, greeted him by name. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure. Your table is ready. The Burgundy Room, as requested." "Excellent, Jean-Pierre. My guest, Mr. Reed, has he arrived?" "Not yet, sir. You are the first." "Perfect." He led Claire through the hushed, opulent dining room, past tables of city councilmen and tech billionaires. The Burgundy Room was at the back, a private space with a single large mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and its own dedicated waiter. This was his stage. Everything was perfect. The lighting, the view, the vintage bottle of Chateau Margaux he'd pre-ordered. He and Claire settled in, making small talk, the anticipation building with every passing minute. Ricky mentally rehearsed his opening lines, the key data points, the vision he would sell. He was ready. He was in command. At precisely 8:05 p.m., 5 minutes after the reservation time, the waiter quietly approached. "Mr. Sterling, your guest has arrived." Ricky stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. He put on his $1,000,000 smile, the one that had charmed investors and disarmed rivals. "Excellent. Send them in." He extended his hand, his eyes fixed on the door, ready to greet the old man who held his future in his hands. The door opened, and Ricky Sterling's perfectly constructed world didn't just crack, it vaporized. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in the span of a single heartbeat. Ricky's hand, extended in a gesture of welcome, remained frozen in midair. His $1,000,000 smile faltered, twitching at the corners before collapsing entirely into a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. His mind, usually a sharp and calculating machine, churned with a single, nonsensical word. No, it wasn't a 70-year-old titan of industry named Edward or Eugene who walked through the door. It was his wife, Evelyn Reed Sterling. She paused at the threshold, her presence instantly commanding the entire room. This was not the Evelyn he had dropped off at the airport for her spa retreat. The woman he knew favored practical, elegant business suits in muted tones of navy and grey, her hair styled in a sensible professional bob. She was pretty, but in a quiet, understated way that he had long ago started to take for granted. The woman standing before him was a stranger forged from the familiar. Her honey-blonde hair was not in a bob. It was swept up in a sophisticated chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck and a pair of diamond earrings that glittered like shards of ice. She wore a tailored evening dress of deep emerald silk that clung to her figure in a way he hadn't seen in years. It was a dress that spoke not of quiet elegance, but of deliberate, unapologetic power. Her face, which he was accustomed to seeing with minimal makeup, was flawlessly sculpted. Her lips were painted a bold, confident red, and her eyes, those familiar, gentle blue eyes, were sharp, focused, and utterly, terrifyingly cold. She held a leather portfolio in one hand, and her gaze swept over the scene before her with a slow, deliberate appraisal. It moved from the obscenely expensive bottle of wine on the table to Claire's shocked and confused face in her revealing crimson dress, and finally, it landed on him. On his outstretched hand, his stunned expression. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the distant clink of silverware from the main dining room, a world away. Claire looked from Ricky to Evelyn and back again, her brow furrowed. A dawning horror began to creep into her expression as she connected the dots. The name. Reed. Evelyn's maiden name. Evelyn took a step into the room, her heels clicking softly on the polished hardwood floor. The sound was like a judge's gavel. "Ricky," she said, and her voice was the biggest shock of all. It was not the warm, familiar tone of his wife. It was crisp, cool, and carried an authority he had never heard from her before. "You seem surprised to see me. Please don't let me interrupt. You were expecting E.V. Reed?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "Evelyn Victoria Reed. I find that using initials in preliminary correspondence helps cut through a lot of the preconceived notions. You'd be amazed how many men assume a venture capitalist must also be a man. Isn't that right?" Ricky finally managed to lower his hand, his arm feeling impossibly heavy. His throat was dry. "Evelyn, what is this? What are you doing here? I thought you were in Napa." "The Napa trip was cancelled," she stated, her voice flat, offering no further explanation. She turned her cool gaze to Claire, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "And you are?" Claire shot a panicked look at Ricky, who was still struggling to process the cataclysmic shift in reality. I'm Claire Vance," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm the Director of Marketing Synergy at Innovate AI." "Director of Marketing Synergy." Evelyn repeated the title slowly, as if tasting an unfamiliar and unpleasant flavor. "Impressive title. Ricky has always been creative with those. When I last checked the company's roster, that position was held by a man named David Hayes." The air crackled with the unspoken truth. Claire shrank back in her seat, her face flushing a shade of red that clashed horribly with her dress. Evelyn's gaze returned to her husband. The coldness in her eyes was now mixed with a profound, searing disappointment. "I believe, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register, "that you and I were scheduled to have a business dinner to discuss the future of your company. I don't recall Miss Vance's presence being on the agenda. It seems you've made a rather significant clerical error." She placed her portfolio on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "This meeting is about a $10 million investment. It requires a certain level of professionalism and discretion, qualities that appear to be in short supply tonight." She looked directly at Claire, her expression not one of anger, but of complete and total dismissal, as if she were addressing an errant child who had wandered into a boardroom. "Miss Vance, your presence here is inappropriate and no longer required. You may leave." It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. Ricky Sterling, the would-be king in his private room, was no longer in charge. He hadn't been from the moment she had walked through that door. Claire, utterly humiliated, fumbled for her clutch purse on the table. She looked at Ricky, her eyes pleading for him to say something, to defend her, to fix this nightmare. But Ricky was silent. He was a statue, his mind reeling as the two separate worlds he had so carefully curated, his stable home life with his simple wife and his thrilling, high-stakes professional life with his ambitious mistress, had just collided with the force of a supernova. And in the wreckage, he was beginning to understand that the woman he had dismissed as a background character was, in fact, the one who had written the entire play. Claire scrambled to her feet, her chair making a discordant scrape against the floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Her face was a canvas of humiliation and fury. She shot one last, desperate look at Ricky, a silent appeal for him to intervene, to assert the authority he had so confidently displayed just moments before. Ricky met her gaze, but his eyes were vacant. He was a man in freefall, the ground having vanished from beneath him. He offered nothing. No defense, no explanation, no comfort. In that moment, Claire saw him for what he was, a hollow man, a pretender stripped of his borrowed crown. The power she had been so attracted to was an illusion, and its source was the very woman now dismissing her like a servant. With a strangled sob of pure mortification, Claire turned and fled the room, her crimson dress a slash of colour against the muted elegance of the restaurant as she disappeared. The waiter, who had been standing discreetly outside the door, glanced in with a flicker of professional curiosity before pulling the door softly shut, leaving Ricky and Evelyn alone in the burgundy room. The silence that descended was heavier than stone. The magnificent view of the city lights seemed to mock Ricky, a glittering testament to a world he was no longer a part of. He finally sank back into his chair, the strength gone from his legs. He stared at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time in years, maybe ever. The diamonds at her ears, the silk of her dress, the unwavering steel in her spine. These were not new additions. They were facets of her he had simply chosen not to see, blinded by his own arrogance. "How?" he finally whispered, the word raw and hoarse. "How did you read Vanguard Holdings? How?" Evelyn did not sit. She remained standing, a position of dominance. She walked over to the table and calmly poured herself a glass of water from the crystal carafe, her movements fluid and controlled. "My father was a brilliant businessman, Ricky. He built Reed Manufacturing from nothing, but he was also a traditionalist. He believed in tangible assets, machinery, real estate, physical products. He never trusted the volatility of the stock market or the ethereal nature of venture capital." She took a slow sip of water. "But I am not my father." She set the glass down. "When he passed away 3 years ago and I took over, I did exactly what you always condescendingly advised me to do. I modernized, I streamlined production, automated where I could. Reed Manufacturing became so efficient, its profits tripled in 2 years. That created significant capital that needed to be put to work." She gestured around the room. "So, I founded a holding company, a private one, Reed Vanguard Holdings, a way to honor the past, Reed, and invest in the future, Vanguard. I hired the best financial minds in the country, people you've only read about in the Wall Street Journal, and for the last 2 years, while you were busy playing the visionary with Innovate AI, I was quietly, methodically building an empire." Ricky's head was spinning. The boring family business he had so often patronized wasn't just stable. It was a cash-generating behemoth. The wife he thought was content with spreadsheets and inventory reports was operating on a level he could only dream of. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice laced with a pathetic blend of accusation and hurt. A bitter laugh escaped Evelyn's lips. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Tell you? Why, Ricky? So you could offer your expertise? So you could advise me on how to run my business, just as you've run yours into the ground. So you could see my success not as our success, but as a new source of funding for your next failing venture. Or perhaps so you could feel even more emasculated than you already did, and find comfort in the arms of girls like, what was her name? Claire. The name hung in the air between them, venomous and sharp. I know everything, Ricky, she said, her voice dropping again to that dangerously quiet level. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is a one-time mistake. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a slim file, tossing it onto the table in front of him. It slid across the polished wood and stopped beside his plate. You're a creature of habit, she continued, her tone clinical, as if describing a specimen under a microscope. You always use the supplementary Amex card for your indiscretions, the one from the joint account that you probably assumed I never check. A charge for a hotel, the Hotel Verto, 2 months ago. You told me you were at a tech conference in Chicago, but the charge was from a boutique hotel just 10 miles from our house. An expensive one. That was the first thread, and I am very, very good at pulling on threads. He stared at the file, not daring to open it. He didn't need to. He knew what was inside. Photos, dates, times, the meticulous work of a private investigator. The entire sordid history of his affair with Claire, and likely others he'd carelessly forgotten. You came to me, well, to Evie Reed, out of desperation, Evelyn went on, her dissection of him relentless and brutal. Your pitch deck was impressive on the surface, full of buzzwords and optimistic projections. But my team and I did our due diligence. We looked under the hood of Innovate AI, and what we found was a disaster. You've overspent, overpromised, and you're bleeding your seed investors dry. You're on the brink of insolvency. This $10 million investment wasn't for scaling. It was to plug the holes in your sinking ship. She finally moved, walking around the table to stand by the window, her back to him, as she looked out at the glittering city. I have to admit, she said, her voice laced with a new, colder emotion. I was tempted to just let you fail, to watch from a distance as your ego and incompetence led you to your inevitable ruin. But then I realized something. My name is still attached to you. My reputation is, in some small way, tied to yours. And I will not allow your failures to tarnish the name my father built. She turned back to face him, and the last vestiges of the woman he thought he knew were gone. In her place was a CEO, a strategist, a queen on a chessboard of her own design. So no, Ricky, I'm not here to invest in you. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to end this. On my terms. Ricky stared at the file on the table, then back at Evelyn. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was struggling to find his footing. The woman he was married to, the woman he had mentally relegated to a supporting role in the grand drama of his life, was not just the lead actress. She was the writer, director, and producer. You planned this, he breathed, the realization dawning on him. All of it. The spa retreat. Letting my application get to the final stage. You set me up. Don't flatter yourself by calling it a set-up, Ricky, Evelyn retorted, her voice sharp as glass. A set-up implies a level of gamesmanship. This was a diagnosis. I needed to see the full extent of the disease before deciding on the cure. Your application for funding from Reed Vanguard came across my desk 3 weeks ago. Imagine my surprise. It was a perfect opportunity to get an unvarnished look at the truth, both of your business and of your character. She walked back to the table and finally took a seat opposite him, the vast expanse of polished mahogany feeling like a chasm between them. Let's talk about your character, shall we? she said, folding her hands in front of her. For 10 years I have supported you. When you quit your stable job at Oracle to chase this dream, whose savings did we use as seed money? Mine. When you needed a co-signer for your first business loan because the bank saw you as a risk, whose name and pristine credit history was put on the line? Mine. I have attended countless boring networking events, smiled at your arrogant colleagues, and listened to you drone on about disruption and synergy until my ears bled. I did it because I was your wife, because I believed in the man I married. Her voice, for the first time, held a tremor of genuine, raw pain, but it was quickly suppressed, replaced by a cold fury. And how did you repay that loyalty? You patronized me. You treated my business, the business that paid our mortgage, funded our lifestyle, and bankrolled your fantasies, as a quaint little hobby. You lied to me. And you brought that child to a dinner where you intended to beg for money, thinking you could present her as a symbol of your dynamic brand. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. Did you really think I was that stupid? That blind? Or did you just not think of me at all? Ricky had no answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought of her at all. In his mind, she existed in a separate sphere, one that didn't intersect with his ambitions or his indiscretions. She was the stable, predictable foundation upon which he could build his exciting, unpredictable life. He had never considered that the foundation might have its own architecture, its own power. I'm sorry, Evelyn, he mumbled. The words felt hollow, inadequate, a child's apology for breaking a priceless vase. Sorry, she scoffed. Don't you dare say you're sorry. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally bump into someone. It is not a word that can encompass this level of betrayal. You're not sorry for cheating on me. You're sorry you got caught in the most humiliating way imaginable. She was right. The deepest emotion he felt at that moment wasn't remorse, but a profound, sickening shame. He had been so sure of his own brilliance, his own superiority. He had viewed the world and everyone in it as pieces on his personal chessboard. Now, he was looking across the board at the true master of the game, realizing he had been a pawn all along. Let's move on to the business, Evelyn said, her tone shifting back to that of a CEO. She opened her own portfolio, the one she had placed on the table. Because your personal failings are, frankly, no longer my primary concern. They are merely a symptom of the same arrogance that has crippled your company. She slid a document across the table. It was a detailed analysis of Innovate AI, prepared by her team at Reed Vanguard. It was brutal. Your core algorithm is clever, she conceded. Genuinely innovative. It's the only real asset you have. But everything around it is a mess. Your burn rate is catastrophic. You've spent nearly $1 million on office aesthetics and perks, a kombucha tap for God's sake, while your top engineers are being headhunted by competitors because you can't afford to match their salary offers. Your marketing strategy, presumably led by Miss Vance, is all buzz and no substance, with a customer acquisition cost that is 3 times the industry average. She tapped a finger on a specific line item. And this is my favorite part. You listed your projected 5-year revenue at $50 million. A bold claim, but you based it on securing 3 major shipping contracts that, according to my sources, have all provisionally signed with your main competitor, Logicor, because you failed to deliver a working beta on time. Every word was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the last remnants of his self-deception. He had been telling himself these were temporary setbacks, hurdles on the path to glory. Hearing them laid out so clinically, so dispassionately, by his wife, he was forced to confront the truth. He wasn't a visionary on the brink of success. He was a failure on the brink of collapse. "So you see, Ricky," Evelyn concluded, her voice devoid of any emotion, "Innovate AI as a going concern is worthless to me. An investment of $10 million wouldn't save it. It would just postpone the funeral." Ricky felt a cold dread creep up his spine. "So, you're just going to walk away? Let it die?" Evelyn's lips curved into that small, chilling smile again. "Oh no, I'm not going to walk away. I told you, I'm here to end this, on my terms." She slid another document across the table. This one was thicker. He looked at the cover page, and the blood drained from his face. It was titled, Asset Purchase Agreement. "As I said," Evelyn explained calmly, "your company is a wreck, but the algorithm at its core is valuable. So is the patent you filed for it. Those are assets I am interested in. Your company is currently valued at next to nothing, and it's carrying over $7 million in debt. Your investors are ready to bolt, and a lawsuit for mismanagement is all but guaranteed once the Logicor contracts are announced." She leaned back in her chair, the picture of calm, lethal control. "I am prepared to offer you a deal. Reed Vanguard will purchase Innovate AI's debts. We will take them off your hands, saving you from personal bankruptcy and years of litigation. In exchange, you will sign over the company, its patents, and all its intellectual property to me. In essence, Ricky, I am offering to buy your failure." The document lay on the table between them, an obituary for his dreams, Asset Purchase Agreement. The words were so cold, so corporate. It wasn't a rescue, it was a liquidation, a hostile takeover orchestrated by his own wife. "You want to buy my company for the price of its debt?" Ricky asked, his voice barely a whisper. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a predator's move, something he would have admired in anyone else. Coming from Evelyn, it was devastating. "You want to take everything I've built?" "Built?" Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "Let's be honest, Ricky. You haven't built a company. You've built a facade, a very expensive, very unstable facade around one good idea. An idea, I might add, that you couldn't execute. I'm not taking what you've built. I'm salvaging the one valuable component from the wreckage before the whole thing sinks into the ocean." He shook his head, a desperate denial taking root. "No, I won't do it. I'll find another investor. I'll figure something out." Evelyn sighed, a sound of weary patience, like a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "Another investor?" "Ricky, my team at Reed Vanguard is one of the most respected due diligence teams in the country. A summary of their findings, the ones I just outlined for you, will be circulating among the venture capital community by morning. I won't even have to leak it. Bad news travels fast. No one will touch Innovate AI with a 10-foot pole after tonight. You are radioactive." She was right. The financial world was small. Once word got out that E.V. Reed had passed on the deal after a final meeting, everyone would know something was deeply wrong. His reputation, already fragile, would be shattered. "And what about your other options?" she continued, relentlessly pressing her advantage. "You can declare bankruptcy. The court will appoint a trustee who will sell off the company's assets for pennies on the dollar to pay off your creditors. The algorithm, the patents, they'll go to the highest bidder. It might be Logicor, it might be me. But you will get nothing. In fact, since you signed personal guarantees on some of those loans, I checked, they will come for our house, the house my father paid for." The mention of the house was a deliberate, piercing blow. He felt the last of his fight drain out of him. He was cornered, outmaneuvered at every turn. He had walked into this dinner believing he was the player, only to discover he was the prize being carved up. "Why are you doing this, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is this revenge? To punish me for Claire?" Evelyn was silent for a long moment, considering the question. "At first, yes," she admitted, her voice losing its hard edge for a fraction of a second, revealing the bruised heart beneath. "When I first saw the investigators' photos, all I felt was rage. I wanted to destroy you. I wanted to make you feel as small and as foolish as you made me feel." She looked away, towards the window. "But as I dug into your business, as I saw the depth of your incompetence and deceit, the emotion changed. It became clearer. This isn't about punishment, Ricky. This is about control. You took control away from me in our marriage. You made a mockery of my trust and my commitment. I will not allow you to do the same to my financial security and my family's legacy. This is me taking back control." She turned her gaze back to him, her eyes clear and resolute. "The algorithm you developed is brilliant. In the hands of my engineering team, integrated with Reed Manufacturing's logistics network, it could genuinely revolutionize the industry. It could be worth billions. I am not letting that potential die with your ego. I am a businesswoman. This is a sound business decision." The cruelty of it was its logic. She had stripped the emotion away and turned his personal and professional collapse into a calculated acquisition. She wasn't just the scorned wife, she was the shrewd investor, capitalizing on a distressed asset. He looked down at the agreement. His signature on that line would mean the end of everything. Innovate AI would cease to be his. His name would be scrubbed from its history. He would be a footnote. "What happens to me?" he asked, the question small and pathetic. "That depends on you," Evelyn said. "Sign the agreement tonight, and the transfer is clean. Reed Vanguard assumes the debt. You walk away with nothing, but you also owe nothing. You'll be free from the lawsuits and the creditors. You'll have a chance to start over, somewhere else, as someone else. And if I don't sign? If you don't sign, I will walk out of this room, and by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I will have filed for divorce. I will also contact your primary investors, Mr. Gable and Mrs. Hayes, and as a professional courtesy, I will share my team's analysis of Innovate AI's financial health with them. Their lawyers will be on you by noon. Your company will be dead by the end of the week, and you'll be buried in litigation for the next 5 years. The choice is yours." It was checkmate. A flawlessly executed, utterly ruthless checkmate. There were no more moves to make. He thought of Claire, fleeing in humiliation. He thought of his investors, whose money he had squandered. He thought of his employees, whom he had failed. And he thought of Evelyn, this stranger sitting across from him, who had outplayed him so completely. With a trembling hand, Ricky reached for the pen that lay beside the contract. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt like a cheap prop. He uncapped the pen. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at Evelyn one last time, searching for any hint of pity, of regret, of the woman he once knew. He found none. All he saw was the cool, appraising gaze of Evie. Reed, the investor who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He signed his name, the dream of Ricky Sterling, tech visionary, died right there on the table of the Burgundy room at Aria. The moment the ink of his signature dried, a profound and irreversible shift occurred. It was as if a spell had been broken. The power, the ambition, the very identity he had constructed for himself evaporated into the rarefied air of the restaurant. He was no longer Ricky Sterling, CEO. He was just Ricky, a man with an expensive, useless watch and a suit he no longer had a reason to wear. Evelyn took the signed document, her movements precise. She reviewed his signature with a practiced eye, then slid it neatly back into her portfolio. She did not gloat. There was no triumphant smile. There was only the quiet efficiency of a transaction completed. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, will be in touch with yours tomorrow morning to finalize the transfer, she said, her voice purely business. I suggest you cooperate fully. It will be cleaner for everyone. She stood up, her poise as unshakable as it had been when she first walked in. The dinner has been taken care of, including the wine you ordered. Consider it a severance package. The final cutting remark landed with brutal precision. He couldn't even afford the meal he had intended to use to seal his future. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked towards the door. Ricky watched her go, a ghost at his own execution. Her emerald dress, her confident stride, the quiet power she radiated. It was the image of a woman fully realized, a woman stepping into her own spotlight. As her hand touched the doorknob, he spoke her name, one last time. Evelyn. She paused, her back still to him. Was any of it real? He asked, the question raw with a desperation he didn't know he was capable of. Our life? Our marriage? She was silent for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was softer, tinged with a distant, weary sadness that was somehow more devastating than her anger. I was real, Ricky, she said, without turning around. The problem is, I don't think you ever were. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing him in the silent, opulent tomb he had chosen for himself. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair where she had sat. The waiter eventually came in, a silent, discreet man trained to be invisible. He cleared the plates, removed the wine glasses, and refilled Ricky's water glass, all without a word, as if tending to a wax figure in a museum of failure. Finally, Ricky managed to get to his feet. His legs felt unsteady. He walked out of the burgundy room, through the main dining hall. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons on him, though he knew it was his own paranoia. He saw himself as they must see him, a man utterly defeated, the ghost of a feast. Outside, the valet brought his Mercedes around. The car, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a borrowed costume. As he got in, he saw a flash of crimson in his peripheral vision. Claire was standing across the street, huddled near a bus stop, shivering in the cool night air. She must have been waiting for an explanation, an apology, for him to emerge and somehow fix it. Their eyes met across the traffic. He saw the accusation, the disillusionment, the pathetic hope dying in her gaze. He had nothing to offer her. He was a sinking ship, and she knew it. He broke eye contact, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb, leaving her there, another piece of collateral damage in the explosion of his life. He drove aimlessly through the city, the glittering lights that had once seemed like a promise, now feeling like an indictment. Meanwhile, Evelyn slid into the back of a black town car waiting for her a block away from Aurea. A calm, grey-haired man in a suit sat in the passenger seat. "It's done, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady. "And Mr. Sterling?" the lawyer asked. "He was cooperative," Evelyn replied, looking out the window as the restaurant receded behind them. "And the other matter? The girl?" Evelyn's face hardened for a moment. "She is a symptom, not the cause. She will find her own way. Initiate the transfer at 8 a.m. sharp, and get the engineering transition team ready. I want them on site at Innovate AI by noon. We're renaming the core project Vanguard Logic. There's work to be done." She settled back against the leather seat, a wave of profound exhaustion washing over her, followed by a quiet, steely resolve. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt free. She was no longer just Evelyn Sterling, the supportive wife. She was Evelyn Reed, the woman in charge of her own destiny. The night was over. Her future was just beginning. 6 months later, the spring sun streamed through the panoramic windows of a corner office on the 40th floor. The view was even better than the one from the Burgundy room at Aria. The office was minimalist and modern, with clean lines, contemporary art, and a large desk made of reclaimed wood and steel. On the desk, a small, elegant plaque read, "Evelyn Reed, CEO, Vanguard Technologies." Evelyn stood by the window, sipping a cup of coffee, looking down at the city. Vanguard Technologies was the new entity she had formed after acquiring the assets of Innovate AI. She had gutted the old company, firing the sycophants and overpaid executives, and promoting the talented but overlooked engineers. Integrated with the logistical backbone of Reed Manufacturing, the algorithm, now known as Vanguard Logic, was flourishing. They had just secured a landmark deal with the largest shipping conglomerate in North America, the very deal Ricky had failed to land. It was a contract worth hundreds of millions, and it was only the beginning. She was different now. The transformation that had begun that night at Aria had solidified. There was an unshakable confidence in her posture, a clarity in her gaze. The quiet strength she had always possessed was now visible to the world. She ran her empire with precision, fairness, and a shrewdness that had become legendary in the tech and finance sectors. She was E.V. Reed, in person and in reputation. A knock on her door. It was David Hayes, the man Claire had replaced. Evelyn had not only rehired him, but promoted him to Chief Operating Officer. "The board meeting is in 5, Evelyn," he said with a respectful smile. "The quarterly projections are even better than we'd hoped." "Thank you, David. I'll be right there," she replied, her own smile genuine. As he left, her gaze drifted to a small, framed photo on her bookshelf. It was of her and her father, standing in front of the original Reed manufacturing plant years ago. She had honored his legacy, and then built one of her own, grander than he ever could have imagined. She had found her purpose not as a wife, but as a founder. Miles away, in a sprawling, anonymous suburb, the midday sun beat down on the asphalt of a car dealership. A man in a slightly too tight polo shirt with a Sterling Auto logo embroidered on it approached a young couple browsing the minivans. "Looking for something safe and reliable for the family?" he asked, his voice strained with a manufactured enthusiasm. It was Ricky. The Patek Philippe was gone, replaced by a cheap digital watch. The Zegna suits were replaced by company-issued khakis. After the fall of Innovate AI, he had been a pariah. His name was toxic in the tech world. His friends had vanished. With no money and no prospects, he had been forced to take a commission-only job selling cars at his cousin's dealership. He spent his days reciting scripts about fuel efficiency and trunk space, his nights in a small, rented apartment that smelled of stale coffee. He sometimes saw articles about Vanguard Technologies and its brilliant, enigmatic CEO, Evelyn Reed. He would read them with a hollow ache in his chest, a mix of envy, regret, and a strange, distant pride. He had seen the brilliance in her, right at the very end. He just hadn't been man enough to recognize it when it mattered. He never heard from Claire Vance again. A quick search online revealed she had moved to another state and taken a low-level marketing job. She too had been cast out of the story. As Ricky explained the benefits of stow-and-go seating, he caught his reflection in the polished chrome of a minivan's hubcap. The face that stared back was tired, defeated, and painfully ordinary. The king had become a commoner, haunted by the ghost of a queen he had created and then betrayed. He had wanted to build a legacy, and in a way he had. He was the man who had dinner with his mistress, only to discover his wife owned the restaurant, the table, and his entire world. It was a cautionary tale he would carry with him for the rest of his life. 1 year later, the city's philanthropic elite gathered for the annual Children's Foundation Gala. The event was held in the crystal ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel, a cavern of glittering chandeliers and the soft clinking of champagne flutes. At the center of it all, a quiet center of gravity, in a stunning midnight blue gown, was Evelyn Reed. In 12 short months, she had become not just a force in the tech world, but a celebrated benefactor. Vanguard Technologies was the gala's title sponsor, and her name was on the lips of everyone in the room. She moved through the crowd with an easy grace, accepting compliments and engaging in quiet, meaningful conversations. She was no longer just in her element. She was the element. At the far edge of the room, near a service entrance, a man in a rented tuxedo nursed a glass of sparkling water. He looked pale and thin, a ghost haunting the edges of a party he no longer belonged to. Ricky Sterling's cousin, a mid-level accountant whose firm had a corporate table, had taken pity on him and offered him a spare ticket. "Get out, see some people, Richie," he'd said. "It'll be good for you." It was not good for him. It was torture. Every laugh, every clink of jewelry, every confident handshake was a reminder of the world he had lost. He had spent the last year in the humbling purgatory of sales targets and customer satisfaction surveys. He was no longer Ricky Sterling, CEO. He was just Richie from Sterling Auto, a man who could tell you the precise cargo capacity of a 2026 model minivan, but had forgotten the language of ambition. He saw her from across the room, and his breath caught in his throat. It was like watching a star being born. He had known she was successful. It was impossible to avoid the business journals that lauded her as the visionary of Vanguard. But seeing her in person, commanding such effortless respect, was different. This wasn't just a woman who had won. This was a woman who had been born to rule, and he had simply been standing in her light. His first instinct was to flee. He turned to slip out the service door, to retreat back to the anonymity of his rented apartment. But he was too late. As she turned from a conversation with the mayor, her eyes swept the room, and, for a brief, terrifying moment, they locked with his. There was no shock in her expression, no anger, just a flicker of mild, distant recognition. For a heartbeat, he thought she would simply look away, dismiss him as part of the scenery. But then, with a calm deliberation that sent a chill down his spine, she excused herself from her circle and began walking towards him. The vast ballroom seemed to shrink. Every step she took was a drumbeat marking the final moments of his delusion. He couldn't run. He was pinned by the sheer force of her presence. She stopped a few feet from him. Up close, he could see the fine lines of confidence around her eyes that weren't there before. She looked serene. "Ricky," she said. Her voice was polite, neutral, the kind one uses for a former colleague you run into at an airport. "Evelyn," he managed to say, his own voice sounding weak and unfamiliar. You look incredible. Congratulations on all the success." "Thank you," she replied, with a small, impersonal nod. "Vanguard has a good team." There was no trace of irony in her tone. It was a simple statement of fact. An awkward silence stretched between them. He felt a desperate need to fill it, to say something meaningful, to bridge the galaxy that now separated them. "Listen, Evelyn," he stammered. "I know it's a year too late, and I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I truly am sorry. For everything. For what I did to you. To us. I was a fool. An arrogant, blind fool. She listened patiently, her expression unchanging. When he finished, she simply looked at him, her gaze analytical rather than emotional. "Yes," she said. "You were." The simple, unvarnished agreement was more cutting than any curse. It was a diagnosis, delivered long after the patient's fate had been sealed. "I just wanted you to know that," he finished lamely, his shoulders slumping in defeat. She looked at him for another long moment, and then she did something he never expected. A genuine small smile touched her lips. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was appreciative. "You know, Ricky," she said, her voice quiet. "In a strange way, I should thank you." He stared at her, completely bewildered. "Thank me? For what?" "For showing me what I was capable of," she explained. "I spent 10 years living as a fraction of myself because I thought it was what our marriage required. I made myself smaller to make you feel bigger. Your betrayal, as painful as it was a cataclysm. It destroyed the world I knew, but it forced me to build my own. I wouldn't be standing here tonight as myself if you hadn't done what you did." She wasn't forgiving him. She was assessing him. He was a data point in her history, the catalyst in an equation that had led to her own greatness. His greatest act of betrayal was, for her, the ultimate act of liberation. It was the final, most devastating twist of the knife. He wasn't even the villain of her story anymore. He was just the prologue. "I hope you find your own way, Ricky," she said, her voice softening with a touch of sincere, distant pity. "Goodbye." With that, she turned and walked away, gliding back towards the center of the room, leaving him standing alone by the service door. He watched as she was immediately absorbed back into her world, laughing at something the mayor said, once again the star at the heart of her own universe. He was completely, utterly forgotten. And in that final, crushing moment, Ricky Sterling finally understood. He hadn't just lost his company or his wife. He had lost the right to even be a character in her story. He was nothing. And from nothing, he would have to learn how to begin again. What a story of karma, consequence, and the staggering power of a woman underestimated. Ricky Sterling thought he was playing the game, but he didn't even understand the board. Evelyn's journey from a quiet supporter to a corporate titan is a powerful reminder that the strongest people aren't always the loudest. She didn't just get revenge. She built an empire from the ashes of her husband's betrayal, proving that the best success is living well and on your own terms. If you were moved by Evelyn's incredible story of reclaiming her power, hit that like button to show your support. What do you think Ricky should have done differently? Let us know in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the quietest people often have the most to say. And of course, if you love stories of epic twists and satisfying justice, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.